My name is Maxim Ersavi, and we're gathering here for a very kind of unique moment, even for this region. In one room, we gathered LGBTI activists for the whole region of Eastern Europe, and this is the first kind of a TV interview where we managed to talk about these issues in general, pan-regionally. So I'm going to start with asking questions about your own countries, but in kind of regional perspective. And I think start with Svetlana. I'm talking about Russia as the biggest country in region, as a bigger troublemaker, because we know that basically all our problems inside smaller countries kind of started out with this anti-gay propaganda law in Russia and Russian attempts to push it as foreign policy. I talked to you over a year ago, and we talked about rising violence in Ukraine, comparing to Russia. And then you said to me, and it's, by the way, following ILGA Europe index, that Russia went up a couple of positions. You said that the situation got a bit even better after the war in Ukraine started. Is it still the trend?
Well, I would say that it's really complicated, because on the one hand, we have really more people who support us. And on the other hand, we have a lot of problems with legislation. We have this so-called propaganda law, we have this foreign agent law, and all these things. And of course, the level of homophobia and level of violence is increasing constantly.
And Volodymyr, talking about Ukraine, obviously rising violence in Ukraine, but in couple of recent days with really unique kind of conference, for example, happening in Kyiv, where activists from the whole region in Europe gathered together. They're all kind of confused about the message with Ukraine. On the one hand, you have historic legislation passing anti-discrimination law. On the same time, you have rising violence against gay people on unprecedented levels. And today we saw this poll, new poll releasing, saying that over 68% of Ukrainians still have negative views towards gay people, and in some cases, the statistics even got worse in the recent 2 days. So, do you have also kind of mixed feelings of what is happening?
Yes, it's look like the very strange mix of. From one hand, yes, we really have some small improvements in our legislation, but they're very small and very decorative, and it's the problem that actually there is still no laws that protect people against from violence. And now our government's making everything just to make visibility of reforming this field with anti-discrimination, because this small amendment to labor code, which has prohibited discrimination toward LGBT people, it's only the small drop in the sea of problem that's facing LGBT people in Ukraine. And together with rising right movements in Ukraine, we see this increasing of the violence against LGBT, and this talks of politics that blaming LGBT for the problem inside Ukraine.
Well, the situation got worse in the whole region of Eastern Europe since mid-2000s, right? And, well, how many of you get death threats on the regular basis? Can you raise hand?
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
around Pride festivals or something like public activities.
Well, that's not normal for a regular human being either, right? So I'm just kind of worried how many of you think that the world, especially Europe, doesn't know enough about LGBT issues in Eastern Europe. Do you agree that this is the issue? They don't know enough, or they don't care enough?
It is the issue. For example, it evidenced with the case of Russia and the rise of the homophobic sentiments in Russia and the passing of the anti-propaganda bill. The focus was on Russia solely, and it omitted the situation in the region, which is in the countries that are around Russia and that are either Russian satellites or former Soviet republics. And it was completely disregarded that the homophobia that was very vividly and very actively used and misused in Russia actually crossed the borders and spread all over the region.
Like
and
in
we
Moldova,
have to
for
deal
example.
with this because we have a kind of pro-European government which is very corrupt and hijacked the whole idea of European integration. And at the same time, we have the opposition who is pro-Russian and who actually threatens us with the cancellation of the anti-discrimination law and passing of the same anti-propaganda bills once they are in power again. And the Moldovan Orthodox Church, which is subordinate to the Russian Orthodox Church, is the biggest voice of homophobia in the country.
What do you think Moldova is going through an anti-oligarch uprising, or went through last year? But that issue wasn't even there on the display. It was the same during the Maidan revolution. The issue was economic reforms and anti-oligarch message. But then again, civil rights equality wasn't the issue. Why do you think it's not happening like in Moldova, for example?
It was the same. The protest started in spring 2015. It continued throughout the year. They installed the courts on the central square. I joined the protest on the 6th of September just to see the biggest of all in this chain, to see what the messages were, just to be present in the crowd. And it was pure populism. They didn't provide any alternative. They didn't provide any strategy of how they envisioned the change. And it was clear that the issue wasn't about the changing the mentality in the system. It was fighting corruption and oligarchic system, but it completely omitted human rights agenda.
Mart, with Armenia and electric Iran. And this was so amazing to see that apart from Maidan revolution, then happenings in Moldova, we saw rainbow flags during electric Iran. It was, maybe a couple of times, but it was there. And some people said that LGBTI activists were involved in the process, and suddenly there was hope that maybe that's going to be an example of civil rights uprising rather than just economic one in post-Soviet country. Why it didn't happen, or is it happening?
Actually, Electric Yerevan was a good space for raising the solidarity and being solidar with one another. But there has not been rainbow flags, and there has not been any flags, because people have decided that nobody is going to come there for their identity or for their cause, but rather than we are gathering to fight the goal that we all have together, the shared goal, which was like the electricity price. But from the other hand, a lot of people were on Bagramian Avenue and they were fighting for electricity price, but a lot of discourses have been opened there for discussion. Like, for example, every evening there was some sort of discussion when everybody who wanted, they could join the discussion. And firstly, it was really very hard for the government and for the police to control the movement because there has been no leaders there and nobody was taking the responsibility of doing something. But like during the years, during the days when people were in a sitting strike in the street, or like they were even sleeping on the street, there were like some sort of leaders who appeared, and through them the government has managed to.
But don't you scare that, for example, that was the main topic during the Maidan, because LGBT organizations and activists decided not to push the agenda of civil rights because, well, it's pro-European revolution. Then in the end, we will have our equality by, rejoining Europe. But that was a great mistake because during the revolution, there were no rainbow flags. People didn't see that gay people were helping out actively the revolution. And now, you can face arguments that where the hell were you during the revolution? Why should I care now about your rights? I understand that those Maidan and Electric Iran are completely different, but dynamic is the same.
Yeah, actually, I agree that, but there are like some sort of places that have been occupied by certain people. Like, for example, everybody knew that in this corner of a street, like the feminists are there, and this is like the LGBT community. They identified them without even like symbols, because Armenia is a small country and Yerevan is like much smaller. If there are some people whom people identify as being a part of the LGBT community, they are so visible that everybody can recognize them.
And that's a security threat, right?
Yeah.
It's actually, anyway, it's the same situation that was in Kyiv during Maidan. Everybody knows our main LGBT activists, and they were at Maidan, and we have a lot of like pictures of them on Maidan, like videotapes. But still, if they're not with the LGBT symbolic, and if they're not putting themselves in agenda, so. People now saying that there was no LGBT supporting Maidan.
Yeah,
So
but
it's even if the people knows that these people are LGBT activists. So now they are not recognizing them as an LGBT activist supporting Maidan.
Yeah, but it's a matter of leadership as well. If you're taking some leader role in the movement, that's really important. For example, after elected Yerevan, and like after the police with water cannons have
Dispersed
the protesters. After that, that was our organization, Pink Armenia, who started to do fact-finding about the cases, and we started to gather the testimonies, and also like we have opened a website for Electric Yerevan, and we were the ones who were managing that. So like to show that we are here and we have our input in everything that is going on in Armenia.
That's what's important.
And Electric Yerevan is not the only case. LGBT people are everywhere in all sorts of movements that is happening.
Anna, I want to address the Georgia issue because, for example, for Moldova and Ukraine, they're going through a similar process of integrating into a trade space. And it was for many LGBT groups and for all queer people kind of a sign that maybe because of that, we can overcome larger homophobia, because we can say like, well, you have to do that in a way to push for greater economic rights, and then we will discuss the issue. But then what is happening that now Georgian government, after getting visa-free regime with ES, is pushing a referendum that could ban same-sex marriages in the country. Don't you feel kind of that the whole process was political theatrics in a way to get this regime, and without the government caring about the issue at all?
Okay, I'll just make a small correction.
Yeah.
So it's not about banning same-sex marriages because it's not allowed. Just because Georgian language is not gendered in and of itself, in the constitution we have no specific gender dimension of marriage. So now they want to impose that gender dimension and make marriage as a unity of man and woman. So that's the case. They started to talk about it like it's kind of a pre-election campaign, but it can take serious dimensions because gender and sexuality issues are always very kind of a good tool to play with before elections, because it's kind of connected to sentiments and to I don't know, nationalism that is always kind of rampant in Georgia. So, but the thing is that we are not even given the visa-free movement now. We are still on the performing mode. We have to perform for Europe, and we have to be good. So it's kind of an ambivalent situation what's going now. And it's really kind of hilarious. Everybody who is speaking in this room, I can say, yes, that is happening in Georgia as well. So we are going the same processes. So maybe kind of taking advantage of being in the same situation can save some experience, or, yeah.
But what do you all think about it? Because all these countries you represent here, they're absolutely dramatically now different, but they have this common Soviet background. And I think that's fascinating that homophobia and homophobic attitudes unite all those countries despite difference in economies and history and so on and so on. But how do you make sure that we're not following the same path like in Central Europe, right? They pushed for greater civil rights equality because of European integration. And then when European integration happened, most forces started rolling back those civil liberties because the general population still doesn't get the concept of equality. How do we not make the same mistake in Eastern Europe? What do you think?
Can I comment, just like to continue? I think it's kind of a double phase of globalization and what is happening now, not only in our region, but like globalization unites countries with the same values, but also pushes nationalism and homophobia as something really, as something that can underline your identity in this globalizing world. So I think Russia is using that really well, and European countries must be more concerned and attentive to all these nationalistic tendencies in the countries.
So make it
that are sometimes encouraged even. Yeah.
I think the difference between us and the Central European countries is that they haven't been affected by the Russian or Soviet influence as much as we are. And we're still present in this media space, in the cultural space, linguistic space. And there are a lot of people in Moldova, for example, who do not speak the state language, which is Romanian, and they watch Russian TV channel. And this is the pure propaganda that is brainwashing their minds. And it's so hard to detach from this flow of information. For example, it happened in Ukraine when the Euromaidan started, but nothing similar has happened in Moldova. And people are so pro-Russian, a lot of people, and the mentality and the background is so similar and appealing to them that we also have anti-Ukrainian sentiments in the country, though we're neighbors. And it's really
well, we're all talking. I'm extremely privileged sitting here in company of one of the bravest people in our region, just because you're brave enough to speak out and to share your views, but also your identity. And that's the biggest problem with the region, because in Russia or Ukraine or Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, with hundreds of millions of people in the population, there are still a handful of people who are openly gay. And, basically because of security concerns. But we're talking so much about personal leadership, and then how it's important to lead by an example. It's not happening at the moment on the needed speed. How do you find, isn't it even frustrating personally for you that you're still in a lone voice? Yes, despite being open, the whole countries are in the closet. And even our other queer people who are not activists cannot join us.
I actually don't think that in Russia situation is so bad, because what really makes me happy is that so many new people come into and they join the movement. And we had this forum for LGBT activists last year, and there were 150 people, and I was really happy that I didn't know at least half of these people. So I think that all this pressure makes people come out actually, because they don't want to take it anymore.
It's also a matter of the size of the population and the country. Russia is big, Ukraine is big, there are more activists, but population-wise, we're like literally few people in the country who are out and proud and marching and fighting for the rights of everyone in the country. And we have very little support from the community because we're a very agricultural, rural country, and you can imagine what it means to be openly gay in such a small country where affected by the political and economic crisis.
Well, we're facing very different, region with different problems, but it is changing dramatically as we speak right now. There is a dismantling of really huge landing monument happening in Zaporizhia in southern Ukraine, and even 2 years ago, it wasn't very even possible to imagine that. Or last year, during the opposition march in Russia, we saw so many LGBT flags there, which was also amazing. So I hope that we're in very frustrating point, but in the beginning of real changes. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really enlightening moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.